While some Christians withdrew to the desert, others declared that the church itself had become corrupt after victory. Local grief sharpened public judgment. They did not merely want stricter discipline, they believed they alone were the true Church of Christ. Authority felt fragile. After imperial victory, Christianity faced not only the world outside, but a wound opening within its own body. Old compromises now demanded explanation. The question was simple and terrifying. Where is Christ's body when Christians accuse one another of betrayal? Conscience demanded clarity. Augustine would later ask, who gives the answer, our party or the Lord who is the body's head? Mercy no longer felt simple. Before Augustine answered, North Africa would pass through decades of bitterness, rivalry, and schism. The past now spoke through doctrine. The schism grew from an older problem: what should be done with those who had fallen during persecution? Authority came under painful scrutiny. After Decius and Valerian, that question had already wounded the church, but now it became a North African storm. The Donatists insisted that the church could not be built by hands that had betrayed holy things. Every decision touched living scars again. Their opponents answered that the church's faithfulness rested not on the minister's purity, but on Christ. Old loyalties hardened quietly. Thus, a dispute about the fallen became a dispute about the church's nature and the power of sacraments. Holiness became a public question. This was no minor quarrel. It forced the church to explain what it actually was. Suspicion settled over every doorway. North Africa knew persecution too closely, and the memory of fear there remained especially sharp. The same event carried opposite meanings for communities. Some bishops avoided further suffering by handing authorities religious books, or sometimes harmless papers instead. Confession now carried political weight. Others surrendered genuine scriptures, believing that by doing so, they were protecting people from bloodshed. A disputed consecration now threatened the whole communion. To stricter believers, such caution looked not like pastoral wisdom, but like betrayal of Christ himself. Grace met public suspicion. Those who handed over sacred books were called traditores, people who had delivered holy things to enemies. Public order could not quiet conscience. Beside them stood confessors, men and women who had endured prison, torture, and the threat of death. Compromise looked dangerous. In the eyes of the people, their endurance gave them almost sacred authority within the community. The old fear returned in different clothing. If such a confessor said the fallen should be restored, many heard him almost as a living martyr. Mercy trembled. But in Africa, many confessors demanded the opposite, not mercy, but greater rigor. After persecution, pastoral wisdom mattered more than victory celebrations did. They argued that one who had betrayed holy things could not easily return to the altar. The city watched uneasily. Thus, the memory of persecution became not only a wound, but a weapon in church conflict. A harder question stood behind every accusation. What had once united Christians against the empire now divided them inside the church itself. The altar became contested ground. The question no longer concerned only the past. It would decide who could lead the future. Mercy needed defenders as much as purity, and in Carthage, this memory would soon become open schism. Imperial favor protected churches, yet also made suspicion stronger there. The crisis erupted when the important see of Carthage became vacant, shortly after the persecution ended. The church now argued over its soul. The election fell to Caecilian, but his appointment immediately met resistance from a powerful faction. Pastoral prudence looked like betrayal. Supporters of his rival claimed the process had been corrupted by intrigue and unworthy maneuvers. African Christianity learned how fragile peace could be. Majorinus, though not a popular choice, became the banner of those dissatisfied with Caecilian. The countryside carried a sharper memory. When Majorinus died shortly afterward, his party elected Donatus of Cassae Nigrae in his place. The empire could reward churches without healing conscience. From Donatus, a strong leader for nearly half a century, the movement would receive its name. Scripture became contested ground. Now one city held two claims to one altar, one episcopal chair, and one church. A hidden social fracture gave theology sharper teeth. Rome and other important churches recognized Circumcellion as the lawful bishop of Carthage. Local suffering gave doctrine an urgent edge. But his North African opponents saw this not as peace, but as support for injustice. Every purity claim required an answer about mercy. Thus, a church dispute immediately gained practical consequences in the age of Constantine. The empire's peace exposed hidden loyalties quickly. The emperor was issuing laws favoring Christianity, and the recognized church received real advantages. The church learned old fear could survive public favor. Those in communion with Circumcellion could receive those benefits. Others found themselves outside the door. Forgiveness required visible courage now. For the Donatists, the emperor's decision did not close the question. It only deepened the wound. The wounded region refused easy explanations now. Now a local election dispute had become a question for the whole Western Church. Bishops faced questions without easy answers. Carthage became the stage where the Church had to choose between purity and unity. A new era of peace carried old accusations forward. The causes of the schism were more complex than a simple struggle for office or personal ambition. Suspicion spread quietly. The Donatists claimed that one bishop who consecrated Circumcellion had been a traditor. Suffering Christians could not easily trust newly honored church leaders. If that was true, they argued, Circumcellion's consecration itself had become invalid. Recognized churches gained benefits that others fiercely resented. Circumcellion's supporters answered that even if a minister was unworthy, God's action was not destroyed by his sin. North Africa listened with suspicion. Otherwise, every Christian would live in constant doubt about baptism, communion, and ordination. Every pastoral decision carried public consequences there. Who could ever know the hidden state of the priest performing a holy action? What looked orderly in Rome felt threatening in Africa. For Circumcellion and his supporters, sacraments rested on God, not on the moral transparency of the minister. Forgiveness became costly. For the Donatists, an unworthy minister could not give what he did not possess. The decision exposed how little trust persecution had left. Thus, sacramental theology became the front line between two different visions of the Church. The empire entered a wounded argument. One side saw the Church as a holy body that must not tolerate betrayal. Sacramental certainty became urgent for ordinary Christian families everywhere. The other saw the Church as Christ's body, where the Lord's power exceeded the weakness of ministers. Order carried risk. The dispute over Circumcellion therefore became a dispute about where the Church's holiness truly resides. Old memories of prison returned through new arguments. That question would outlive the participants and become central to Augustine's later answer. The promise of unity sounded dangerously premature. The disagreement was not merely theory, it immediately reshaped daily church life. Constantine's peace did not dissolve the moral legacy of terror there. If someone moved from Circumcellion's communion to the Donatists, they required a new baptism. A city election became theological fire. For them, the earlier baptism was invalid because it came from a polluted communion. A bishop's past could now trouble every future baptism. But if a Donatist returned to Circumcellion's followers, rebaptism was generally not required. Ordinary believers measured leaders by old scars. Here the deeper difference appeared. Is the Church a pure assembly or a mixed field? The people judged bishops by memories of terror. The Donatists imagined the Church as Christ's bride, who must remain without stain. The dispute moved from memory into institutions. Their opponents remembered that Christ had commanded the tares not be uprooted before the harvest. Even a legal decision could deepen spiritual division. For one side, episcopal authority depended on the bishop's personal purity and faithfulness. Imperial order entered a wounded Christian house. For the other, it came from the office received within the visible, united church. The line between prudence and betrayal became painfully thin. This principle sounded almost like Roman law, yet it protected the church's stability. The language of purity gathered political force. Inside the dispute lay not only doctrine, but a deep social anxiety. The Church had to ask whether grace depends on worthy hands. Many Donatists even accepted people who had surrendered documents, if they opposed Circumcellions strongly enough. Every choice carried remembered pain. This did not erase their hunger for purity, but it showed the conflict was broader. Carthage and the countryside now spoke different languages. Donatism became a theology, but also a voice for the wounded, suspicious, and socially displaced. A hidden fracture became public. The two parties soon divided, not only theologically but also geographically. Persecution's end did not end discernment inside Christian life within the church. In Carthage and its surroundings, Circumcellion supporters were strong among the Romanized classes. Pastors now negotiated between mercy and credibility. Farther west, in Numidia and Mauritania, the Donatists were far more popular. Baptismal waters now reflected different memories of the past in Africa. These regions were agricultural, less Romanized, and often felt exploited by Carthage. The question of baptism entered ordinary family life. Much of their produce went to Italy through Carthaginian merchants and landowners. Donatist anger grew where rural suffering met memories of faithful resistance. Rural people saw in this not merely economics, but an unjust order. The altar itself became a place of suspicion. For them, Rome and Carthage belonged to one force controlling land and profit. The controversy revealed that social memory can become theological fire. In Carthage, good relations with Rome seemed necessary for stability and prosperity. A church seeking peace discovered unresolved accusations beneath. So the same imperial peace looked like salvation to some and danger to others. North African villages turned church discipline into public identity. Christianity had long reached the lower classes of Numidia, Mauritania, and rural Africa. The defeated years still governed the present. There, the new faith had become a force the empire could not fully overcome. The controversy made believers ask who could restore whom. Among the Romanized elite of Carthage, however, Christians were fewer until Constantine arrived. North African villages heard a different gospel. With his victory, one could now be both a good Roman and a good Christian. Official decisions could not silence the rural conscience. For urban new converts, this was a blessing. For rural Donatists, it was a warning sign of corruption. Judgment sharpened. They feared that those who controlled politics and economics would now control the church. Imperial support changed the emotional meaning of church membership. Therefore, the dispute over purity also became a protest against the new social order. Old courage challenged every compromise nearby. Donatism cannot be reduced to politics, yet without social pain, it cannot be understood. A community wounded by terror distrusted quick official reconciliation. Emperor Constantine wanted unity because a divided church threatened his new order. A generation shaped by persecution mistrusted easy restoration. He ordered bishops to examine the case and eventually supported Circumcellion as the lawful bishop. The argument over holiness became socially explosive there. Constantine did not intend to become the schism's theologian, but he became judge of its consequences. Every compromise felt dangerous. He instructed North African officials to recognize only Circumcellion and those in communion with him. Imperial help made unity appear compromised to many. In practice, this meant access to imperial benefits, exemptions, and recognition. The struggle revealed how social grievance could shape doctrine. For Donatists, this looked like the victory of falsehood, strengthened by state power. A church freed from prison faced judgment at its table. They continued hoping the emperor would one day see the error and support their side. Unity now demanded painful trust. Their early position was not anti-Roman. Again and again they appealed to Rome. Every appeal to purity raised another question about Christ's mercy. Even later, under Julian, Donatists hoped imperial authority would reverse the decision. A church struggled to recognize its own body. This shows that Donatism did not first reject the empire itself, but the empire's choice. The old title traditor carried devastating moral force. They believed the state's judgment had been corrupted by bad information and urban intrigue. The church discovered victory's hidden cost. The more Constantine supported Circumcellion, the more Donatists felt themselves persecuted. Christian victory opened doors, yet revealed hidden divisions within communities after persecution. Thus, the emperor, seeking unity, unintentionally strengthened the feeling of a separate holy community. No decree could settle wounded trust. Each new decision from above confirmed for them that the true church must stand apart. The controversy turned geography into a theological map. Here, the theological dispute began turning into a long-term social identity. Neither side could easily escape the memory of persecution. The schism was no longer only about the past. It was becoming a way of belonging. The argument would not remain safely clerical. Roman decisions looked like order in Carthage, but in Numidia, they often looked like domination. The crowd judged by memory. Therefore, Donatists more easily believed that the official church had sold itself to the powerful. The demand for purity began reshaping Christian identity. This does not mean their movement was consciously a political revolution from the beginning. Rival memories shaped the same gospel. They often spoke the language of purity, martyrs, traitors, and the true church. The official church defended unity. Opponents defended remembered courage there. But beneath that language lay the pain of people who did not trust the urban world. Pastors faced impossible choices. For Romanized classes, Constantine opened the way to a newly respectable Christian life. The dispute made baptism a test of visible ecclesial identity. For many poor Africans, that same path looked like the church being absorbed by empire. Imperial favor complicated every decision. They wanted to remind newly converted elites that truth did not come only from Latin cities. The sacramental question touched every believer directly. Numidians and Mauritanians, whom many considered ignorant, also claimed to know God. Past betrayal haunted every gesture toward reconciliation afterward. This social tension did not create the whole theology, but it made the theology explosive. The official settlement looked like victory to some. When the official church spoke of unity, Donatists heard the voice of winners. A fractured conscience stood behind the controversy. When Donatists spoke of purity, their opponents heard pride and schismatic stubbornness. Official recognition solved the legal question while deepening the emotional crisis. Thus, each language became unintelligible to the other side, though both spoke about the church. The countryside heard another meaning. This was the tragedy: one faith, one Bible, but two memories of faithfulness. North Africa became where victory's wounds still remained painfully visible. Donatism was born where theology met the wound of society. Donatists rejected compromise, but their protest carried real historical pain. As long as that wound remained open, no administrative decision could easily close the schism. To others, recognition felt like a second betrayal. Soon, that wound would give rise to a far more radical and dangerous form of protest. A buried accusation surfaced. Around the year 340, a group appeared among the Donatists called the Circumcellions. For Augustine, the answer would require both truth and charity. The name's origin is debated, but it probably related to their life around martyrs' shrines. The city preferred official order. They were mostly Numidian and Mauritanian peasants, driven toward fanatical resolve. In North Africa, persecution's memory tested every act of reconciliation inside churches. They believed death for the Donatist cause continued the glory of the ancient martyrs. Every accusation carried older suffering forward. Sometimes this hunger for martyrdom became so extreme that it pushed them towards self-destructive acts. Every attempt at order uncovered deeper spiritual suspicion. Yet they cannot simply be portrayed as ordinary criminals or people without convictions. Even peace could feel like betrayal there. They were religious to the point of fanaticism, and that made them especially dangerous. The church faced a judgment deeper than legal procedure. For them, the old style of Christian endurance had ended with the age of persecution. Martyrs became measures of loyalty. Anyone who died fighting the official church could also be counted a martyr. The empire could enforce decisions, but could not manufacture trust. Thus, the memory of martyrdom, once a source of endurance, became a justification for violence. The question entered daily worship. Urban Donatist leaders sometimes tried to distance themselves from this radical force. The struggle exposed how easily wounded holiness can become a boundary. But when they needed active support in the countryside, they could turn to them again. Rome could not erase conscience. The Circumcellions turned the schism from a church dispute into a threat to public order. The memory of martyrs became a contested inheritance. Their appearance forced Roman authority to respond not only with decrees, but with force. Past mercy now looked politically dangerous. Thus, the Donatist tragedy acquired a new, darker and more dangerous tone. The African controversy made sacramental assurance a matter of daily anxiety. Now the struggle for a pure church would begin tearing through fields, towns, and human lives. No answer felt harmless. When Circumcellions appeared near fortified towns, trade could nearly come to a standstill. A local quarrel became a mirror for the whole church. Credit suffered, roads became dangerous, and landowners could no longer travel without escorts. The church had gained power, not rest. For Roman authorities, this was no longer only a church problem, but disorder. The wounded conscience of Africa demanded more than administrative peace. The response included persecutions, attempts at persuasion, punitive actions, and military occupation. The church would need language stronger than administration. But none of this solved the deep discontent that continued feeding the movement. The church had to learn how holiness survives human failure. The empire could suppress a gathering, but it could not easily heal memory. Human weakness now threatened visible unity again. In some places, Donatism became almost an alternative society beside the official church. The argument over one consecration became a battle over grace. Roman force only confirmed radicals in the belief that they were suffering for truth. Holy things became matters of jurisdiction. Every new execution or exile could easily become another story of martyrdom. The argument moved from one election to the church's nature itself. Thus, the power trying to stop the schism sometimes strengthened its emotional foundation. Old accusations became instruments of belonging there. Later, the Vandals would seize the region. Yet the Donatist movement would not immediately disappear. A local African wound entered universal Christian theology. In the 6th century, the Eastern Roman Empire would recover Africa, but the schism still lived. The altar became disputed. Only after the Muslim conquest in the 7th century did Donatism and the Circumcellions finally disappear. A local controversy became a Western problem. But after disappearing as a movement, Donatism left a question the church could not escape. Carthage could not command memory. Augustine was not the first to argue with the Donatists, but he would become the most important. Official recognition no longer meant peace. Before him stood a question concerning not only Africa, but the whole Christian story. Local resentment wore a sacred language. Can the church be holy if weak, sinful, and unworthy people remain within it? The Donatist protest drew strength from remembered suffering there. If a minister is sinful, does God truly stop working through baptism and communion? The people heard theology through hunger. Augustine would answer that the source of the sacraments is not man, but Christ acting in the church. Old fear shaped new accusations. He would also insist that the church now resembles a field with wheat and tares. Grace sounded risky to many. Perfect purity will be revealed, not now, but in God's judgment at the end. Questions of holiness now reached roads, markets, and homes. The Donatists could not accept a church that tolerated traitors and mixture. The sacramental fight became a fight over belonging. For them, such tolerance looked not like humility, but surrender to the world. The movement's severity frightened opponents, yet questions could not vanish. Augustine would see in their rigor not only error, but a threat to love. Imperial letters could not mend suspicion. If purity separates a person from brothers, it can become a new form of pride. The new Christian age had not ended testing. Yet the church could not simply dismiss the Donatists as people without meaning. The martyrs' memory refused quiet burial there. Their questions were serious because they concerned holiness, authority, memory, and faithfulness. The answer needed theology strong enough for wounded communities in Africa. That is why the dispute with them forced Western theology to speak more deeply about the church. Hope required patience. The Donatists were rejected, yet they left a mark on those who refuted them. The imperial court could hear cases, not heal wounds. So it often happens in history. Defeated questions keep working inside victorious answers. One election became a test of identity. Donatism would lose as a movement, but its challenge helped define the church for future centuries. The imperial settlement created spiritual uncertainty everywhere. In the end, Donatism was a reaction to the same new order that produced monasticism. Discipline sounded safer than mercy. But monks withdrew from the world, while Donatists challenged the body of the church itself. The official church could not ignore rural bitterness. They wanted a church without traitors, without compromise, and without imperial contamination. The Donatist conscience turned history into accusation again. Yet their longing for purity often created new wounds, new boundaries, and new harshness. The theology of purity became tied to geography there. They raised real questions: who belongs to the church, and where do sacraments receive their power? The village remembered differently. They asked whether the church can be holy if it bears with the weak. The official church answered with unity, not mere politics. Their answer was schism. Augustine's answer would seek unity in the grace of Christ. The controversy moved from pulpits outward. This struggle shows that defeating empire can be easier than preserving love after victory. The rural movement answered with memory, not mere rebellion. The church now had to learn how to live not only under persecution, but inside power. Justice sounded painfully divided. Donatism became a warning that righteous pain can become destructive exclusiveness. Public success could intensify questions once postponed by fear within the church. It also reminded Christians that church unity without holiness provokes resistance. The same scriptures were read through different wounds now. The next chapter will show how theological battles after Constantine became even wider and more dangerous. The city and countryside interpreted holiness differently. For the question remained the same: who could guide a church that had received power? People chose through inherited grief. The Donatist story did not fit a simple tale of villains attacking a flawless church. The conflict showed how victory could divide Christians. It revealed that a church gaining public honor must also face new temptations. The struggle reached beyond church walls quickly. The Donatists were wrong to make separation the answer, yet their fear was not imaginary. A single episcopal chair carried two rival memories. Many remembered bishops who had surrendered books, officials who had switched sides, and elites who arrived late. Doctrine turned personal. For wounded believers, these memories made official unity look suspicious, perhaps even dangerous. The memory of martyrs gave moral force to dangerous conclusions. For the wider church, however, Donatist separation threatened to turn every failure into a permanent division. Peace carried hidden fractures. If every sinner invalidated the church's ministry, no believer could ever rest in God's promise. The question of unity now required theological courage. That was why Augustine would refuse to let human weakness become stronger than divine grace. The schism found emotional fuel. The church, he would argue, is not pure because its ministers are pure. The next generation inherited not only doctrine, but hardened suspicion. It is holy because Christ, its head, remains faithful even when his servants fail. Africa learned unity required more courage. This answer did not erase the need for discipline, repentance, or moral seriousness. The controversy showed victory over Rome could reopen Christian divisions, but it prevented the church from becoming a courtroom where nobody could ever be restored. Each altar carried rival history. In that sense, Donatism forced the church to defend both holiness and mercy together. The fight over one bishop reshaped Western ecclesiology permanently. Its failure became one of the pressures that shaped the church's mature self-understanding. Shared scripture could not guarantee shared memory. The Donatist crisis shows that Christianity's victory over Rome did not end the struggle. The crisis taught that peace can expose hidden fractures. It moved the battlefield from prisons and arenas into sacraments, elections, memory, and social trust. The controversy reached ordinary households. No emperor could solve these questions by decree because they lived inside Christian consciences. The argument would echo long after Donatus disappeared there. No schismatic purity could solve them either, because separation could wound the body it claimed to protect. Memory demanded truth. The Church had to learn whether holiness could survive mercy and whether mercy could preserve holiness. The wound became deeper than procedure alone. That lesson would matter far beyond North Africa, in every age of Christian power. Sacred history became a local weapon, because every time the Church gains influence, the Donatist question returns in new clothing. A wounded region turned history into a communion test. Who belongs? Who judges? And can Christ's body remain one when its members are wounded? Peace had not healed everything. The next battles will not be smaller. They will reach the very language of Christian doctrine. The coming argument would reshape ecclesiology deeply, and the question will remain, can the Church be holy without tearing itself apart? The future depended on remembered wounds,